So today we have a wonderful 5 panelists here. But first of all, I would like to ask the Mrs. Beverly Hall, the Special Assistant to the Secretary Health for the Universal Health Coverage at the Philippine Department of Health. I would like to ask her to a little bit illustrate how it's going in Philippines. What is your effort for achieving UHC? So floor is yours. Beverly, please.
Thank you, Naoko. Well, after a series of health reforms in the last 20 years in the Philippines, which focused largely on health insurance coverage and supply-side improvements, the Philippines passed a UHC law last year, around February of 2019. This time, the overarching objective was to return to primary health care. And this was a means to attain more equitable health and financial protection outcomes, as well as to achieve overall sustainability of the reforms. On the health promotion side, explicit were the goals to make Filipinos health literate, provided healthy living conditions, and protected from health risks or hazards that could affect their health. So while most of the stakeholders were busy debating about provider payment, the financial side of the reform, our civil society organizations really championed the health promotion provisions, which included creation of a health promotion office, earmarking budget, 1% of the DOH budget going into health promotion. That just means the budget will increase by around 400%. Funding community-led action researches, and institutionalizing health impact assessment, which would protect communities from large-scale development projects. Meanwhile, on the primary care side, the law actually sought to match every Filipino with a primary care provider to access quality continuing care. But achieving this would require changes in the way, for example, PhilHealth pays for primary care, not just a token benefit, but a real benefit that pays well. Negotiations around defining who are considered primary care providers, because this determines who gets paid, or how to transition vertical programs which are currently lodged in the Ministry of Health back into PhilHealth, where a comprehensive primary care package is supposed to be paid for. Political challenges aside, a key challenge for us in implementing these reforms remain to be having a mechanism to have institutional or governmental as well as sectoral capacity to implement these reforms. Knowing fully well that the time horizon required to build a responsive HR to implement the reforms takes a long time. And then obviously there are also limitations around civil service which make it difficult for you to retain good talent. So in health promotion, for example, the field has moved largely away from mere health education. So if you want to implement nudge interventions, for example, or overcoming commercial determinants of health, you won't go through typical public health route of hard regulation, but working with the private sector to generate innovative mechanisms. In terms of financing and delivering primary care services, since governments have also increasingly moved, and we included, to a mechanism that does purchasing rather than just top-down management of a public healthcare system, the required talent or skills are actually more sophisticated as well, which is, again, more difficult to get in the public sector. So I end by saying that we need a mechanism to quickly build up a new cadre of professionals for health, not just health professionals.
Thank you very much. So you share the achievement, but as well as the challenges, but international people understand the Philippines' big progress. Thank you very much. So now we would like to turn to the other speakers, but we would like to ask you to the one question is, from your experience, what are the key challenges, bottlenecks in advancing toward UHC, and what are the innovative solutions? Previous panel discussion, we discussed similar issues. We understand how difficult to talk about the issues in 3 minutes. However, I need to ask you to challenge it. So first, I would like to, it's my pleasure to giving a floor to Dr. Koku Awonoor, Director of the Policy and Planning and Ghana Health Services. So floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. To talk about the challenges and the button, I think in the morning session or the earlier session, a lot of comments have been made on challenges. So let me just either reiterate some of them or and add a few. I think that the key challenge, in my view, as we drive towards UHC is basically, seriously, how to operationalize UHC so that we can achieve the intended objective. We know that UHC is the way to go, but you must also realize that UHC is competing with other high-impact interventions, HIV, malaria, that have a lot of resources. So it's important to understand that as we move on this agenda, there will be a need for us to find a niche in terms of a platform where we have to, sit UHC, so that it can play its actually intended role. The second bottleneck I see, in my view, is to do with the health workforce. And I will speak for Ghana. It might be different in different countries in terms of if you look at the whole area of health workforce. But Ghana basically is the adequacy and the mix of the critical workforce that needs to be strengthened. But also the key challenge of the community health volunteers. That means different things to different countries in different contexts. That needs also to be looked at so that they can play the essential role in moving the agenda forward. I think that there are other critical challenges in terms of infrastructure, in terms of logistics, in terms of supply system that need to be addressed, and also the prioritization and packaging UHC. In Ghana, for instance, we have a double burden disease now, almost a triple burden because of NCDs. But somehow, if you look at the PAC agenda, a lot of focus on MCH. And so how do you start thinking around integrating other important areas like NCDs into PAC? Intersectoral collaboration mechanisms have to be dealt with. The challenge of a clear governance framework for PAC and UHC needs to be defined. I think that it came out this morning again, how do we have a clear governance, but also how do we engage the private sector? I think the focus has been on the public sector, and the partnership that needs to be built between the public and the private sector for the provision of primary health care. Health information management system, measurement, for instance, is very important, and that will be a challenge in terms of defining. But also the linkages between the primary care as you move with UHC and the secondary and the tertiary level. How do you work towards the challenge of referral systems, connectivity between the primary care and the secondary and the tertiary care? And lastly, I think that we need to also try to look at issues of equity in UHC, where we must identify all persons that are left behind. It's not an easy task to define the poor and identify them. What about provision of primary health care in peri-urban population? How do you address that? Issues about gender gaps, cultural barriers. I mean, these are challenges that needs to be addressed, and I think I will leave the rest to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Koku, thank you very much. You mentioned many relevant and also the common challenges in many countries and many fields. But you have a responsibility to service delivery in your country. So maybe we can discuss later or hear from your answer how to solve the challenges. But now I would like to turn to the Dr. Erika Di Ruggiero. Is this correct?
Close enough.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Erika-san is an associate professor and director of the global health at the Della Lana School of Public Health. She is an editor-in-chief for global health promotion. So can I ask you, Erika-san, the same question?
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity. So when thinking about my remarks, I've made a particular decision to focus in on the health promotion perspective, which is, as everyone knows, one component of the comprehensive universal health coverage definition. And from a Canadian perspective, while we do have UHC, just some lessons learned that I'd like to also reflect on that kind of inform the challenges that I'm going to enumerate, and there are many. So while priorities will vary in terms of making investments in UHC, when funds do get locked in, and certainly from our experience, it becomes very difficult to reorient services towards prevention and health promotion. And so that's why I think we need to really think a priori and continuously about how health promotion and prevention stays on the UHC agenda and gets prioritized relative to other dimensions of a very comprehensive and complex definition. And arguments to shift the emphasis from treatment to prevention and health promotion aren't new. And while the field is well positioned to understand and take intersectoral action on the drivers of poor health and inequities, the proportion that is spent on health promotion, certainly in our country, and I would argue in other high-income countries, and this is something I think we need to continually measure, is not sufficient to have the kind of impact that we need. As a Canadian, I think, and many of us in the room can point to the many declarations that we've either signed on to, quoted in our various papers, including the 1986 Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion, which is from my country, which really, I think, put the emphasis on reorienting health services, among other things, and the social determinants of health. However, I don't think we've moved from the rhetoric to the action sufficiently. And there are many reasons for this, and I reflect on them in an article I've written recently, and many other scholars have commented on this. So the 5 challenges I want to articulate are: there's a relative lack of investment in health promotion research, programs, and policies compared to other dimensions that make it very difficult for the impact to be visible and to demonstrate its worth at a meaningful scale. The second challenge is the perils of what I call shortism, or which really privilege action on the now and threatens longer-term investments in prevention and health promotion when the benefits are not perceived as immediate, except when there are crises or threats. And let me be clear, of course, we want to be dealing with those as well. But we don't often count the number of lives we've saved as a result of prevention and health promotion. The third is the evidence base, and I'll come back to that, I think, in the solutions, the kind of research that we're doing or not doing to make the compelling case for really investing in preventive health promotion initiatives. And we do know some of these answers, so it's not a question of only gaps in knowledge, which you would expect as a comment from an academic. So there are things we're not acting on. However, there are areas where we could be investing more health promotion research in. A comment that was made this morning, which I'd like to reiterate, is the failure to address the commercial determinants of health, which I think is particularly germane to not just addressing NCDs, but also to making investments in health promotion and disease prevention. And I guess finally, getting health promotion on the agenda is one thing, and I would argue that we've certainly done that. But when it is taken up, it can be only taken up partially or not ideally. And so I guess the final challenge I'd like to end with is that and I was pleased to see the comment from the Philippines, we can't only have health promotion initiatives that target individual behavior change. Because if that's the only focus of our health promotion efforts, which we have come to call lifestyle drift, then I don't think we're going to be any further ahead, and our health promotion activities may actually perpetuate inequities. We really need to be investing in health promotion strategies that take whole of government, health and all policy approaches that tackle the social structural determinants of health and inequities, but also not ignore the community wisdom and knowledge. And we therefore have to intervene on the levers for health that largely lie outside of the health sector rather than fixing one individual at a time. So the kind of health promotion we invest in also matters, and I'll just stop there with that challenge.
Thank you, Erica-san. Thank you very much. And Canada is like a host country, is our Bible or our charter. So maybe we can discuss how to realize the issues. And thank you very much. So now we would like to invite Dr. Justin Koonin. And he is a member of the UHC 2030 Steering Committee, co-chair of the WHO Social Participation Technical Network, co-chair of the SDG 3 Global Action Plan Civil Society Advocacy Group. But at the national level, Justin is the president of ACOM. He's a formerly AIDS Council, New South Wales in Australia. So what is your vision and opinion about it?
Many thanks, Naoko. And if I could take just 1 second before that to acknowledge my Australian colleague, Pete Salama, who passed away in the past few days. As many of you know, Pete was an outstanding champion of UHC, and particularly for the most marginalized. So we'll honor his legacy by committing even further towards the goals we all seek. I want to talk about two challenges very briefly, and I'll start quite broadly and narrow in later on the specifics and some specific solutions. The first challenge, although it's also a great opportunity, is that we are so multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral in this movement. On stage, we have academia, we have representatives of governments, we have multilaterals, we have civil society. We don't have the private sector, though I know, of course, they're here in numbers. Do we have any community health workers in the audience? Maybe, hopefully. So this multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral nature of what's required to reach UHC is terrific, but it's also really hard work. And the metaphor I like, and it's not mine, but I like it, is that we're kind of trying to cook a vegetable soup, and we're all vegetables. And so we put carrots in there, we put leeks in there. What do you put in Thailand? Maybe you put lemongrass and some chili, and everyone gets a little bit mixed together. We're trying to cook each other together, but then we go back to our own tribe of vegetables. The carrots go back to the carrots, the leeks go back to, what am I talking about? Because then, so I'm from civil society. We have these discussions at a multi-sectoral level. I go back and talk to my civil society colleagues and say, hey, you've been talking to the private sector and now you sound a little bit like the private sector, and we don't really like that about you. We want to maintain our identity, and we don't think the private sector is really the way to go. And probably some governments say, hey, you've been talking to civil society and we're not sure they're that efficient or know what they're doing. It's actually really complicated to do multi-sectoral and engagement well. And so I think it's a tremendous opportunity, because we can't reach the goals we want without doing this. But there are deep-seated tensions and sometimes value differences which we can resolve, but we really need to surface. So that's a macro challenge that I see in the movement. Honing a little bit more on the role of civil society, and I completely acknowledge that I'm now going to talk about equity. It's not the province of civil society. Everyone is interested in equity, but somehow it's the rallying cry to leave no one behind, leave no one behind, leave no one behind. And that's what civil society has a particularly key role in addressing, I think. But what do we actually mean by leaving no one behind? We can talk about all of the technical challenges in achieving UHC, and it's critical we talk about health financing, it's critical we talk about insurance, about ensuring medical supplies and all of that. But fundamentally, some of the key bottlenecks towards getting to UHC are not technical, they're political. And some people are left behind, not because we don't know how to bring them with us, but because we, and often governments in particular, are choosing not to do so and actually making particular decisions not to do so. I'm talking, for example, in my own context, for example, and there are many others, about sex workers, about men who have sex with men, about transgender people, about people who inject drugs, about prisoners, people who are stigmatized and criminalized and marginalized. And until we speak not just about economics, but about the right to health and about human rights, I think we'll be failing the most marginalized. And it's really difficult to have those political conversations. We saw at the high-level meeting and in the lead-up when we were finalizing the declaration how contentious it was, the issues around sexual and reproductive health and rights, the issues around migrants. But unless we have these difficult conversations, we can say that we're leaving no one behind, but in reality, we are exactly leaving the most marginalized people behind. So those are my two challenges.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. And first of all, thank you very much. You mentioned about our colleague, WHO colleagues, Peter Salama. Pete is our dear friend. Thank you very much. And you talk about multi-level and country level, local level, about multi-sector engagement, but especially the global level. You work in the UHC 2030, and this is one of the good platform to bring the many people, many stakeholders again. So now I would like to ask the Dr. Takao Toda-san. He is the Vice President for the Human Security and Global Health at the Japan International Cooperation Agency called JICA, and also co-chair of the UHC 2030 Steering Committee in 2017 and 18. So in my country, we don't talk about the first name, right? I never talk about Takao-san, but maybe Takao, please, this is yours.
Okay, thank you, Naoko. I don't want to inundate you anymore with plenty of challenges, but let me do cautiously. Maybe most of us do not have appetite anymore. Yes, our colleagues and in the many important occasions, we talked a lot about what to do issues, and behind that, challenges we identified in a very appropriate way. But after 5 years, SDG is established, we are now, I feel that we are now, how to say, going into the second phase of our attempts. That is an how to do phase. So as our Ghanaian friend said, the operationalization will be more and more important. We are putting light on that. Globalization, as you know, has a lot of risk. And I think the most important risk is to enhance the expectation of people. People can know the cutting edge, the first-rate medical services without getting it on the ground in reality because of IT technologies. So their expectations are getting higher and higher without being fulfilled. So UHC is becoming a kind of unachievable miracle, or should I say, mirage. So many things have to be done, but we have a very, very scarce resources. That is also a cliche or in the international conferences like this. Even though how we put stress on PHC, on nutrition, even though how scientists and academia vindicated the importance of health promotion, for example, economic internal rate of return of nutrition is more than 1,000, some say 1,600. But the investment on those things still insufficient, except the case of Philippines and Thailand and in some other exceptional countries. But at the same time, looking back the history, as Ban Ki-moon mentioned, Japan, Korea, China, Sri Lanka, and recently Bangladesh. Bangladesh foreign aid is decreasing, but they drastically improved the stunting ratio within 10 years, more than 10%. This kind of thing happening in many countries. Public expenditure in Thai, vis-a-vis GDP, stays at the percentage of 3 point, etc. during the past 2 decades, while the health conditions drastically improving. Senegal, Kenya, Ghana, and the often mentioned Rwanda. We did not imagine at all in 1980s, 1990s, where I was there, Rwanda will be as of today. So I'm now starting to thinking about most of challenges are not found on the ground. Maybe those challenges are in our mind. If we could change realistic mindset, maybe the world will change. I don't want to, romanticize the issues of UHC. I try to be realistic for this dream. So let us move on to the solution by saying so. Naoko-san, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Toda-san. So now we are going to discuss about second round. Discuss about how we have to do, or what we have to do, or how we can do to bring or have an impact on achieving UHC at the country and the community level concretely. So, Toda-san, you said the mind change, but you are the vice president of the bilateral agency. You have a lot of experience in the country level and also in a policy-making level. So now I would like to start you, Toda-san, from you, Takao-san, about what we can do to have an impact on the country level. So you need some picture?
Okay.
Back
Oh,
screen?
if possible,
Any
instead
picture?
of my handsome face, yes. Okay. Thank you. It's much better. It's much better. Okay. I don't want to explain it in a limited time. New coronavirus, Chinese government analyzed genome structure completely within 30 days. And within 24 hours, the result of the analysis shared all over the world without spending any cost except a very few dollars of telecommunications. So this is a brighter aspect of our technologies we are having now. And my conclusion, to be straightforward, is frontline service delivery with quality is my conclusion. But we have to be very careful about the meaning or definition of quality. Of course, evidence-based, scientific, highly sophisticated, knowledge-concentrated, that's fine. But what I want to talk is satisfaction and due respect to the dignity of people. I say this from fantastic viewpoint, no, realistic viewpoint. We have limited money, resources, human resources, but we have unlimited opportunities of sharing information and wisdom. So if we change our mindset to utilize this sort of wisdom, knowledges, by making full use of our technologies, we could change the frontline morphology, the people's satisfaction, behavior of frontline health workers. That is my modest suggestion. Let me continue a little bit. Syntax. Philippines is very much successful. Thailand is also. It's very difficult to introduce this sort of thing to Japan. Japan's tax system is saturated. But there are so many countries, including Ghana, you can learn a lot and you can import and contextualize this sort of wisdom or information vindicated in the real countries with almost no cost. For that purpose, you can just send people or you can just have a Skype meeting. I would like to strongly recommend you and to myself to make full use of these limited resources, knowledge and wisdom on the basis of modern technologies. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Toda-san. And also you mentioned related about like ownership of the people and participation of the people. And it's exactly the same message we got from the video in this morning. It's a beautiful video from the like activity as a Thailand in a community, so warm and touchy one. But thank you very much. So now I would like to ask Justin. So what we can do, what do we have to do to have an impact in the country?
Thanks. And I didn't realize this beautiful picture about trust between government and population was coming up. So thank you, Toda-san, because it's a perfect segue on what I want to talk about. And I guess the starting point or the premise is that civil society and communities have a key role to play in this movement. Of course, the other sectors do as well. But our key role in reaching the last mile, because the last mile, the hardest to reach populations, often don't access health systems in the way that the general population does. And I also think that communities and civil society have a key role in social accountability in terms of holding governments to account for the promises they make. So I'm going to make two concrete suggestions about what needs to change structurally in the way that communities engage with governments and others. One sort of top-down and one from the bottom up. So let me start from the top down. And I think it's really important that governments formalize the way in which civil society communities, populations engage in national level health planning processes. And there are some wonderful examples around the world of where that is happening. And Thailand is one of the best examples. And congrats to the National Health Commission Office from Thailand, Dr. Wirasak, Dr. Suwit, and others who are here. It really is a gold standard. And there are some others. There's the État Général de la Santé in France. There's the Societal Health Dialogue in Tunisia. There's the National Health Assembly in Iran. But by and large, these are exceptions. Not every country is doing this engagement of populations in national health planning well. And it gives me pleasure to say that WHA is working on a handbook for social participation for UHC at the moment in partnership with civil society and with academics. And particular pleasure because the genesis for this work happened at a meeting around your desk in Geneva about 18 months, Naoko. So stay tuned for that. We're currently doing consultations. But the idea is to present best practices and challenges around how do we engage populations, community, civil society in these national processes. And that is developing, and I think it will go a long way to improving the trust between government and the general population. I'm not sure, though, that inclusion in government processes is enough on its own, precisely because communities and civil society have a social accountability role. And for that reason, the second thing that I think we need to do as a concrete solution is to create national-level civil society platforms, cross-health issue, working on UHC, who then have a role in advocating towards government and holding governments accountable. And CSEM, the Civil Society Engagement Mechanism for UHC 2030, of which I'm part, of which one from the last panel is part, of which Evelyn is part, conducted as much consultation as we could in the lead up to the high-level meeting. But the reality is that at the country level, it's still incredibly fragmented. And so you speak to there's HIV people here and NCD people here and people working on blindness here. And what we're doing is finding ways to coalesce the different health issues at the community level to a single global movement for health for all. And on this one, I think we know what the answer is. I'm not sure how we get there. But if we have these big conferences and we sit on the stage and tell everyone the solutions, I'm not sure that's as valuable as saying, this is what we want to do, come and join us. And I'm fairly sure that there are people in the audience today who can be part of that solution. So we'd love to have those conversations with you, whether it's about financing, funding, whether it's about developing a vision for civil society. I think we can see where we want to go, and we need help from all sides, and we commit to doing that.
Thank you very much. So now I would like to ask the same question to Erika-san about Dr. Erika. It's what we have to do, what we can do for the country.
Sure. So I guess, again, my perspective is sort of colored from a health promotion perspective, as well as some of the lessons I've learned just doing research in this area. I guess some of the caveats, and maybe not all countries have come to this conclusion, but one of the things that I've seen developed as a narrative, which I think isn't always that helpful, especially in high-income countries, is that health promotion is seen as a panacea for containing healthcare costs, because we know that healthcare is not going down in costs, it's actually going up in costs, and in some countries it's projected to bankrupt other sectors. And so, after health and education, and I mean health care and education, there isn't much left for other things like housing, food, etc. So I guess the question there is, if we do expect health promotion to deliver on its prevention and upstream agenda, we need to also invest in it, and we need a sufficient dose and intensity, and we need to properly invest in it in the long term and not just through pilot projects. And I think that therefore also requires a high level of political commitment to it, including with an equity orientation, as I've indicated. And that speaks to, I think, thinking in a more nuanced way. So we've been talking a lot about the workforce in UHC, but let's talk in a more nuanced way about the workforce that is actually dedicated to prevention and health promotion within UHC investments. And so that workforce that's actually charged with working with sectors outside of health, because many of the levers for the determinants of health, of course, as we all know, lie outside of health. And then finally, I think the kind of evidence that we need, so what we are generating isn't sufficient. And the area of implementation science or research, I think, does offer some potential solutions, as long as it focuses on not just understanding what works, but under what contexts, the kinds of processes that lead to meaningful uptake and scaling of interventions, which historically have been kind of stripped out of studies by virtue of the kind of research designs that are selected. And I would argue that all of our intervention studies need to have an explicit focus on measuring the unintended consequences. So otherwise we can't truly answer the question, who was left behind by our intervention? And while that's happening more and more in the kind of research that is being funded, I think we could do better there. The other thing I will add is that we have to actually be prepared to stop doing things that don't work. And I know that seems a little cheeky of me to say, but I think things that don't work continue to be tweaked, and we contribute to that as well as researchers. We have to stop doing those things to allow for innovations to take hold and be scaled up. Which leads me to sort of my final point, and that is that we need better evidence on scaling. But that requires, I think, a more nuanced view about what we're scaling. We're not just scaling interventions, we're scaling innovations, we're scaling knowledge, we're scaling knowledge how to scale or scale out. And there are many, I think, important lessons that can be learned from example. I'll just take one example, a 5-country effort in Latin America and the Caribbean to look at reducing salt consumption. It didn't just take one approach, but they looked at food policy reform, multiple stakeholder agreements, social marketing techniques. They set up regional networks to share data and evidence. They identified opportunities for policy comparisons. And explicitly in the research that was done and funded by an agency in our country, the International Development Research Center, they identified the pathways to scale and the relative trade-offs. So they asked questions such as, what is the impact of an innovation at a given level of scale? And what is the impact of that scaling, so that we don't do that as an afterthought? Otherwise, we will never reach those who are typically reached by our regular interventions and not those who we are failing to reach. So finally, I do think then that back to financing models, let's be also nuanced about the kind of financing models we need as part of UHC. So I would argue financing models for health promotion and prevention initiatives. We need new thinking about that. And there are some good examples already, such as in Thailand. And finally, we need to redress the research funding imbalance. Much of the research funding that is currently in play really is still going to a lot of biomedical and clinical research, and less so to health systems and population and public health research. For those of you who are around in Mexico in 2004, I believe it was, where we had a declaration on increasing health systems research, I don't know how far we have come and whether we've held global research funders to account. So we have to align our research investments to the kind of questions we need to generate this kind of evidence. So those are, I think, possible solutions that are within our reach, but we have to continue to work towards them.
Thank you very much. It's clear, and I hear a very exciting way because we have a wonderful new research project you can create for the health and the well-being of the people. So now I would like to ask Koku-san about your view.
Thank you very much. Just to build on the earlier speakers, I think that, first of all, we need to draw heavily on lessons from Alma-Ata to Astana. And by that process, also create platforms that promote learning across countries. It's very important that we do not reinvent the wheel. I think that we should also try to make an investment case for UHC. That would draw on countries that have actually done it right, so that we build on that. One of the important things that I think we should be doing is to have a clear pathway for measurement. There seems to be, in my view, a lot of duplication efforts to measure. And just like Alma-Ata, what was the goal? So we need to start thinking, how do we measure our progress? Deal with issues about alignment, a lot of duplication. And so also, how do we find innovative ways to invest, really, just like the previous speaker said, invest in UHC by financing PSC. If I want to can we also look at ways where we create incentives for UHC progress in some of the countries? I mean, those who have done very well, what kind of incentives can be provided so that motivates others to follow suit? If I talk concretely for Ghana, what we've done since Astana, I think through the support of PSCPI, we've been able to develop the vital signs profile for PSC measurement. And for us, this is an objective assessment at this point of our PSC. What we did following that was to, based on the VSP, the vital signs profile, was to develop what we call a national strategic plan for PSC. And again, we have support from PSCPI to do that. So those are the two blueprints. But the overarching document that we've done just a couple of weeks ago is to finalize our roadmap for UHC. And so for us, that is the way that we're going to now move into the next stage of implementation. Of course, addition to that is the whole talk of how do we reform our national health insurance in a way that it will also facilitate the process of financing a PSC. If you look at the formula currently, a lot of it is geared towards curative. I think the fund is about 20% is actually going for the PSC level in terms of disbursement, while 80% is going for curative. And that reform will address that challenge. Plus, finally, how, looking at other ways of domestic resource mobilization, in terms of trying to finance the additional gap in terms for finance. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Maybe the floors, when we open the floor, there are a couple of comments and also information about investment case or UHC manual, a couple of issues come back. Let's say that the issues you say that PHUH reform is a continuous effort, right? It's a long journey. Always we need to adjust and make a balance and change the system with the support with the public people. It's a huge task. Thank you very much. But I would like to Beverly to join that discussion. So what we can do, what we have to do to have an impact at the country level.
So my co-panelists have mentioned a lot of things, and I won't repeat it, but I think it's important to start shaping expectations of the public what they need to exact from policymakers, from their legislators, from their local government officials. Because what we've seen in our experience in the Philippines is that even at this point in time, if the support value of PhilHealth continues to be low, but still the public satisfaction rating of PhilHealth is still high, then what does it mean? It means that the public actually still expects only some form of financial assistance, not actually financial protection from PhilHealth. So changing how the public perceives or expects from national agencies is going to be important. And the other thing will be about capacity, which I mentioned a while ago. This is very important in terms of the agility of, say, the bureaucracy to respond to the UHC reforms. But also important is probably making sure that the training of the future professionals for health will really be value-driven, one that takes into heart equity and collaboration. Why collaboration? We all know that everyone talks about multi-sectoral cooperation, but it's really very difficult to operationalize because everyone has their own egos to carry. And then the last point is, if we think about capacity building across the sector, we also think that no one should be left behind. Government, academia, civil society organizations, so that everyone participates in the table in an equitable manner and everyone gets to contribute constructively.
Thank you very much. So even though the time is limited, but I ask the all panelists to squeeze your comment as short and as much as possible, because I would like to have some time to open the floor to the question and the comments. So the panelists, so would you please identify yourself first? And so I have some gentlemen here, so would you please? Do you have a microphone? Yes. Good.
Thank you very much. My name is Jean-Claude Mugunga. I'm from Rwanda. I'm also a faculty at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. So my question is really responding to the great conversation of how we make this UHC operational. And I want to recognize that being in a room and a meeting like this, UHC will mean different things to different countries, and folks are pursuing different depending on where they are. But I'm here to ask a question on behalf of the poorest countries. Let's say specifically 67 low and middle income countries who cannot finance what the real comprehensive UHC we've been talking about is today, even if they were as efficient as they can. There is a gap of at least 50 billion to 100 billion a year between what those countries can mobilize domestically and to achieve UHC, not just the insurance card or the umbrella that tells you to go knock to the door of the clinic to find that the medicine is not there, but a comprehensive health care that funds the supply side, builds the clinic, go to the community, and all of that to reach the last person. So my question becomes, if the discourse here is to fund UHC domestically, how are those countries going to operationalize that UHC plan? And our colleague from Ghana can chime in. There are a lot of ideas. Are they going to be forgiven the debt that they pay every year, around the 20 million that they owe to the banks and other loans they have taken? Are they going to maybe stop the illicit type of tax abuse, multinational corporations that take around 600 billion a year from those countries? How are they going to find that money? And then from our colleague from JICA, we know that the donor countries have combined 54 trillion gross income a year. So financing UHC for the lowest countries comes down to just 0.18 of their income. Is that too much to ask a leftover to a neighbor so that a person who is in a rural area breaks their head, they need surgery, don't have to be concerned that I need to purchase my health back and I don't have money to do it? Can my neighbor help me to do it? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very practical question. So do you want to answer, or Toda-san? Erika-san, Sensei, do you want to answer? Or Toda-san, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very short. Yeah. At least empirically, probably 4% of GDP should be covered by public expenditures. And if your countries are unable to do so, I think you can legitimately ask global societies to compensate. But this is not just a gap filling. This is an investment for the future. In case of Rwanda, JICA invested $100 million only for nutrition last year. And this kind of thing should be the obligation of global societies. But among those gap-filling activities, we need to duly consider the possibility of concessional loans so that the recipient could keep the motivation of internalize this sort of investment. And lastly, but individually, I have a bit skepticism of current costing for achieving UHC. Yes, as a Canadian colleague said, we need to scale up wisdom and information for much, much more wise usage of money. Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there any panelists who would like to add something? Or it's okay? Okay, thank you very much. So I have a lady again, this side. So would you please?
Yeah, I'm Sulakshna. I'm from the Public Health Resource Network in India and the People's Health Movement Global. I was glad to hear the nomenclature of social accountability and participation. But I think the challenge for all of us is that, who is at the policy-making table and whose interests are being served by the policies or the decisions or the schemes or the programs that, the countries are implementing. And for instance, I'm from India, and we see that in the last decade, the push towards publicly funded health insurance scheme through mainly engaging and trying to get the private sector into providing services and showing it to them, advertising it as a business model, has had awful repercussions on and consequences on financial protection and health equity, something which is completely opposite of where we are wanting to reach with, universal health care. So what I want to ask the panel is that, when we have so many examples and we are sitting in a country which has such a huge achievement in achieving universal health care through 80% publicly funded hospital services and nearly 100% publicly funded and publicly provided, publicly delivered hospital services and publicly delivered 100% primary healthcare services. And we have experiences all our country in India where all the states are actually committed to strengthening the public health system and have historically also have had strong government health systems. You see a huge difference, in the actual, the real indicators of, universal health care, of financial protection and how they're able to reach the most vulnerable. So when we have such an overwhelming evidence on the efficacy of the government health system to provide financial protection and health equity, and for the most vulnerable that too, why is it that, we keep talking about, putting public money into the private sector for it to provide the services, and we are seeing the consequences all over the world. And I think we should not be complacent, and we should not turn our eyes against the evidence. And I would really, the issue is that the minute you put health, you promote health as health market or as shops or health as commodity, that's where we have lost the plot in universal healthcare. And I would really urge that a panelist just respond to that and consider that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So do you have any comment? Do you have anyone? Okay, Erika-san, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was an excellent set of points you made. I think no country is exempt from that kind of threat. For example, in Canada, we actually have an ongoing court case going in one of our western provinces where a physician is actually challenging our Medicare, and we've had, it's been in the courts for several years. And I think this is an area where, the global academic and people's health movement and civil society can share evidence because these threats to publicly funded healthcare continue to rear their ugly heads. I have an economist colleague in Canada, Morris Barra, who used to call them the zombies that sort of come up every once in a while and not just at one time of the year. And I think that takes a lot of energy and effort. In our case, there have been several people in the courtroom actually challenging this, and this is someone from within the system who's arguing against it. And so I think we have to do better across networks to preserve what is considered to be publicly funded healthcare.
Okay, thank you very much. The time is running, but Toda-san, 10 seconds, do you want to add it?
10 seconds.
Oh, no, it's
Sorry.
30 seconds. Okay, please.
Let me very quickly, but the important anecdote for all of you about Dr. Piazza-gon, ex-health minister of Thai, who came to Japan 2 years ago with 15 colleagues. And I prepared lectures for him, but he refused. Instead, he moved all around Japan with microbus, discussing about the contextualization of detailed design of policy. What I want to say to you, our Indian colleague, is now we are in the phase of detailed designing of policies. What you said is right, but the point is, how can we detail properly designed in the Indian context? I would like to recommend you to be the more active participants of global learning arena, and if you and some of your stakeholders have chance, come to Japan or come to join the knowledge creation activities, and then you'll find the solution to be put in practice immediately after returning to your country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the detailed design is the core, even in the public money, who pay for it, what's taxes, what the insurance, there's so many issues. But time is running, and we have 5 parallel sessions right after this session to deepen each discussion. But let me ask all panelists as a conclusion. I would like to ask all of you your commitment, your personal commitment, how to achieve UHC, what you are going to commit. So can I ask Justin? Right, please.
My commitment is to keep my door open to speak with everyone, especially with the people I don't agree with.
Thank you very much. Arika-san.
Oh, what he said, actually, I think that's very well put. Yeah, I think we do have to be open to different points of view. Let me just put on an academic hat. I think as academics, we also need to step aside when the evidence is very clear and use our voice to advocate for change rather than also feeding into more research is needed and put our energy in areas where research is still needed.
Just making sure that I put in all the effort to push the Agenda 2030 for UHC, at least for my country.
I commit to being flexible and continue to open doors for young people that come after me.
Let me continue to work on global knowledge co-creation processes. This year is a very important year for health promotion, Olympic year, and we have Tokyo Olympic, but much more importantly, we have Nutrition 2020. So let's move on for health promotion and knowledge co-creation on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate all panelists. I would like to thank you again. So thank you very much. So I would like to close this session. Thank you.